Colorado Territory, 1875. The wind carried dust across the lone figure of Elias Keller as he stood on the platform of Silver Creek's modest train station. At 26, Elias had already claimed his slice of the West, 160 acres of promising cattle land. But the isolation of frontier life had begun to gnaw at him in ways his pride wouldn't let him admit. Trains running late again, Keller called the station master, checking his pocket watch. Might be another hour yet. Elias nodded, adjusting his hat against the sun. 6 months ago, he would have sworn that the frontier was no place for sentiment. A man needed to be hard as the land itself to survive. Love was a luxury for folks back east who didn't have to worry about drought killing their cattle or Cheyenne raids in the night. But after 2 winters alone in his cabin with nothing but howling wind for company, he'd finally surrendered to what his married neighbors had been telling him. A man needed a wife out here almost as much as he needed water. The advertisement had been simple enough. He'd described himself honestly. Young ranch owner with prospects, seeking a practical woman of good character. He'd received 3 responses, exchanged letters with each, and finally settled on Olivia Reid from Pennsylvania. Her letters were well-written, sensible, with just enough warmth to suggest she might make pleasant company through the long winters. She'd written of her skills, cooking, sewing, basic medical knowledge, all valuable on the frontier. Elias had arranged for her passage west, careful to make it clear this was a practical arrangement, not some romantic folly. What he hadn't written was how the silence of his cabin sometimes pressed on him like a physical weight. How he'd begun talking to his horse just to hear a voice. How he'd started to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake, abandoning civilization for this harsh, beautiful emptiness. The distant whistle of the train pulled Elias from his thoughts. He straightened his best shirt, brushed dust from his pants, and tried to ignore the nervous fluttering in his stomach. It wasn't as if this were a love match. Just 2 practical people making a sensible arrangement. She would provide companionship and help around the ranch. He would provide security and a home. Simple as a business transaction. The train rounded the bend, black smoke billowing from its stack as it slowed into the station with a screech of brakes and hissing steam. Passengers began disembarking, mostly rough-looking men and a few travel-worn families. Elias scanned the faces, looking for the woman who had described herself as average in appearance, with practical sensibilities. Then she stepped down from the second passenger car, and Elias Keller forgot to breathe. She was 21 years old, as she'd stated in her letters, but there was nothing average about Olivia Reid. Her chestnut hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet, a few wayward curls framing a face that made his heart stutter in his chest. Her traveling dress was simple blue calico, dusty from the journey, but well-made. She carried a single valise, her eyes searching the platform with quiet determination. When those eyes, deep green like the pines on his northern ridge, found his, Elias felt a jolt of something he'd never experienced in all his years of frontier hardship. Recognition, perhaps, or possibility. "Mr. Keller?" she asked, approaching with careful steps. Her voice had a slight musical quality, different from the flat Pennsylvania accent he'd expected. "Miss Reid." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of every callus on his hands. "Welcome to Silver Creek." She studied his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You're younger than I expected," she said finally. "As are you, ma'am." A small smile touched her lips. "I believe honesty is important in any arrangement, Mr. Keller. But I found that women who advertise their appearances too favorably often attract the wrong sort of correspondence." Smart, Elias thought. "And careful. Your journey was comfortable, I hope?" he asked, taking her valise. "As comfortable as 3 days on a train can be." She glanced around at the dusty town. "Is your property far?" "About an hour's ride. I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house tonight. We can be married by Judge Wilson tomorrow, if that suits. Then head to the ranch after." She blinked, and for a moment Elias feared he'd been too blunt. But then she nodded. "That seems sensible, though I would appreciate the chance to wash the travel dust from my hair before becoming a bride." Something about the word bride made Elias's collar feel suddenly tight. This woman was to be his wife. The reality of it hit him with unexpected force. "Of course, Mrs. Landry at the boarding house will see to your needs." He gestured toward the town's main street. "Allow me to escort you." As they walked, Elias found himself stealing glances at the woman beside him. There was something in her careful posture, in the way her eyes assessed everything they passed, that suggested more than the schoolteacher she'd claimed to be. But then, everyone came west with secrets. He certainly had his own. Is it always this quiet? She asked as they passed the general store. Not always. Saturday nights can get rowdy when the ranch hands come to town. She nodded, absorbing this. And your ranch? You said you have 30 head of cattle? 42 now. Had a good calving season. He cleared his throat. I've built a proper house. 2 bedrooms. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Won't leak when it rains. I didn't come west expecting fancy, Mr. Keller. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Landry's attempt to bring civilization to the frontier. Elias handed Olivia's valise to her at the door. I'll call on you tomorrow morning at 10, if that suits. The judge can perform the ceremony at 11. She hesitated. Mr. Keller, may I speak frankly? I'd prefer it. I've traveled a very long way to marry a man I know only through letters. Before I do, I'd like to sit with you and have a proper conversation. Her eyes held his steadily. Perhaps you could join me for supper this evening? Elias hadn't expected this. In his mind, the arrangement was straightforward. She'd agreed, she'd arrived, they would marry. But looking at her now, he realized the courage it must have taken to travel across the country to wed a stranger. I'd be honored, he said. 6 o'clock. She nodded, relief visible in the slight softening of her shoulders. 6 o'clock. Elias turned to leave, then paused. Miss Reid? I'm glad you came. Her smile was small but genuine. Let's hope we both still feel that way tomorrow, Mr. Keller. As he walked toward the livery to collect his horse, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered life had just been struck by lightning. He'd expected a practical woman for a practical marriage. What he hadn't expected was the way his heart had jumped when she stepped off that train, or how her direct gaze had somehow seen through the armor he'd built around himself since leaving Kentucky 4 years ago. He reminded himself firmly that love was a luxury frontiersmen couldn't afford. This was about survival, about building something that could last in this unforgiving land. Having a wife who was uncommonly beautiful was simply an unexpected bonus, nothing more. But when he returned to the boarding house that evening and found her waiting in the parlor, her hair now loose around her shoulders and wearing a simple green dress that matched her eyes, Elias Keller began to suspect he might be in serious trouble. Dinner was a quiet affair in the boarding house dining room, with Mrs. Landry hovering nearby, ensuring propriety was maintained. The food was simple, beef stew and cornbread, but after months of his own cooking, it tasted like a feast to Elias. Tell me about your ranch, Olivia said after they'd exchanged pleasantries about her journey. It's good land. Sits in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. The cabin, the house, faces east, so you get the sunrise coming over the ridgeline. Elias found himself wanting to paint a picture she would find appealing. I've planted apple trees, though they're just saplings now. And there's good soil for a kitchen garden. You seem to have thought of everything. I try to plan ahead. He hesitated. It can be hard country, Miss Reid. Beautiful, but demanding. Winter storms, summer drought. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. Her eyes studied him. Are you trying to warn me away, Mr. Keller? No, ma'am. Just being honest about what you're agreeing to. I appreciate honesty. She took a sip of water. My father was a doctor in a small town outside Philadelphia. I assisted him from the time I was 12. I've seen birth and death and everything between. I'm not afraid of hardship. And teaching school. A flicker of something crossed her face. Yes, I taught the local children for 3 years after father died. But the new doctor who took over his practice brought a wife who decided I was unsuitable to instruct the town's youth. Unsuitable? What? Olivia set down her fork. My mother was Shoshone. She died when I was born, but people have long memories in small towns. Elias studied her face more carefully, seeing now the high cheekbones, the particular way her eyes tilted at the corners. In the West, such heritage wasn't uncommon, but he understood immediately why a proper Eastern town might have pushed her to the margins. That doesn't matter to me, he said, surprised to find it absolutely true. No. She arched an eyebrow. Many men would withdraw their offer. I'm not many men, Miss Reid. Out here, we judge people by what they can do, not where they come from. He met her gaze directly. Can you ride? Yes. Shoot. Rifle, not pistol. Cook. Better than passably. Then you're already better prepared than most who come west. He offered a small smile. The fact that you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen is incidental. Color touched her cheeks. You're more silver-tongued than your letters suggested, Mr. Keller. Not silver-tongued, just honest. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the intensity between them. You should know I was in the war. Confederate side. I gathered from your accent. Does that trouble you? She considered this. The war ended a decade ago. I'm more concerned with the man you are now than the boy you were then. Relief eased through him. I've built something good here. Something that could grow. But I won't lie. It's lonely work. Is that why you sent for a bride? Loneliness. The question struck closer to home than he'd expected. Partially, he admitted. And partially because a ranch needs more than one pair of hands to thrive. But if you're asking if I expect... He lowered his voice, conscious of Mrs. Landry nearby. Wifely affections without regard for your feelings, the answer is no. I'm proposing a partnership, Miss Reid. The rest can develop as it will, or not at all. Olivia studied him for a long moment, and Elias had the distinct impression he was being measured against some internal standard. Finally, she nodded. I accept your terms, Mr. Keller. Tomorrow at 11. Something like disappointment flickered through him at her businesslike tone, but he pushed it aside. This was exactly the practical arrangement he'd wanted, wasn't it? As he walked her back to her room, she paused at the door. One more thing, Mr. Keller. Yes. I don't believe the frontier is where dreams go to die. I believe it's where they go to be tested. Her eyes held his. I hope to find that you agree. With that, she slipped into her room, leaving Elias standing in the hallway, wondering what exactly had just happened and why his carefully ordered world suddenly seemed to be spinning in a new direction. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect May day in Colorado territory. Elias arrived at the boarding house at precisely 10 o'clock, wearing his Sunday suit and carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Olivia was waiting in the parlor, wearing a simple dress of pale blue. Her hair was arranged in a neat twist at the nape of her neck, with a few small white flowers tucked into the pins. You look. Elias fumbled for words that wouldn't sound too forward or too detached. Thank you, she said, saving him from his awkwardness. Is that for me? He handed her the package. It's customary, I believe. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver brooch, simple but elegant, shaped like a mountain columbine, Colorado's flower. It's beautiful, she said softly. It was my mother's. One of the few things I brought west. He hesitated. You don't have to wear it today if you don't. I'd be honored. She interrupted, pinning it to her dress. Thank you, Elias. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something shifted between them at the sound of it on her lips. The ceremony at Judge Wilson's office was brief and straightforward. The judge, a gruff former Army officer with bushy sideburns, seemed amused by the match. Never thought I'd see the day young Keller took a wife, he commented as he signed the marriage certificate. You must be quite a woman, Mrs. Keller. Mrs. Keller. The name hung in the air between them as they left the judge's office. Man and wife in the eyes of the law, but strangers in almost every other way. We should head back to the ranch, Elias said, helping her into the wagon he'd borrowed for the occasion. Get you settled before dark. The ride was quiet at first, both of them conscious of the enormity of what they'd just done. The town fell away behind them, the road winding through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of aspen and pine. Tell me about Kentucky, Olivia said after a while. Your letters mentioned you left after the war. Elias kept his eyes on the road. Not much to tell. Family had a horse farm near Lexington. Lost most of it in the war. Father died at Shiloh. Mother held on until 69, then the fever took her. The familiar pain had dulled over the years to a manageable ache. My older brother Henry tried to keep the place going, but there wasn't much left. I headed west in 71. I'm sorry about your family, she said quietly. He nodded, accepting her sympathy. What about you? Any family besides your father? No. It was just the two of us after Mother died. She looked out at the landscape. He taught me everything. Reading, mathematics, medicine. He wanted me to be independent. Seems he succeeded. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps, though I'm not sure he'd consider marrying a stranger and moving to the frontier as the independence he had in mind. No, I expect not. Elias hesitated. If you don't mind my asking, why did you answer my advertisement? A woman with your education and appearance. could have had her pick of situations. She was quiet, so long he thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was thoughtful. After the new doctor's wife had me removed from teaching, there weren't many options in town. I could have become a seamstress, or perhaps a companion to an elderly woman. But everywhere I went, I was still the half-breed doctor's daughter. Her gaze remained on the passing landscape. I wanted to go somewhere I could be judged for who I am, not for my parentage. Your advertisement was specific about wanting a practical partner, not an ornament. That appealed to me. And the distance from Pennsylvania? Now she did look at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. That was certainly a factor. The wagon crested a rise, and Elias reined in the horses. There, he said, pointing to the valley below. That's home. From their vantage point, they could see the entire spread, the sturdy log house nestled against a backdrop of pines, the corral and barn, cattle grazing in the meadow, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through it all. It wasn't grand, but in the golden afternoon light, it looked like a painting of the frontier dream. It's beautiful, Olivia said softly. It's a work in progress, he replied, not wanting to oversell what was still a modest operation. But it has potential. As they approached, Elias found himself seeing the place through new eyes. Noticing the unpainted porch railing, the sparse furnishings visible through the windows, the lack of curtains, or any softening touches. He'd been so focused on survival and building the ranch that he'd ignored the details that might make it a home. He helped Olivia down from the wagon in front of the house. I should see to the horses, he said awkwardly. Make yourself at home. I'll bring in your trunk. Inside, Olivia moved slowly through the main room, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the stone fireplace, the simple kitchen area with its iron stove. Everything was clean and orderly, if plain. There were bookshelves with a surprising number of volumes, history, animal husbandry, a few novels. A rifle hung over the door, and a fiddle was propped in the corner. When Elias returned with her trunk, he found her examining the fiddle. Do you play? She asked. Poorly, he admitted. But it passes the winter evenings. She nodded, continuing her inspection of what was now her home. The second bedroom? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. He showed her to a small but tidy room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the creek. It's not much, he said, but the mattress is new. It's fine, she assured him. Better than I expected, actually. An awkward silence fell between them. I'll start supper, he said finally. You must be tired from all the excitement. I can cook, she offered, if you'll show me where everything is. They moved around each other carefully in the kitchen space, establishing boundaries, learning rhythms. By the time the simple meal of salt pork, beans, and biscuits was ready, some of the tension had eased. Over supper, Elias outlined the ranch routines, his early mornings checking cattle, the seasonal work of branding and haying, the nearest neighbors, and their temperaments. The Whitfields to the north are good people. Martha will likely call on you once she hears I've brought home a wife. The Jensens to the east keep to themselves, but they're fair. Town's a full day's ride, so we go only when necessary. He paused. Winter can be isolating. Snow can block the road for weeks. I understand, she said. I brought books and thread for sewing, and I assume there will be plenty of work to keep me occupied. Yes, though, he hesitated. I don't expect you to work yourself to exhaustion. This isn't indentured servitude. She smiled slightly. I appreciate that. But I didn't come all this way to sit idle while you build our future alone. Our future. The words hung between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. That night, Elias lay awake in his bedroom, acutely aware of the woman sleeping just across the hallway. His wife, legally, though not yet in any other sense. He'd meant what he said about not expecting wifely affections, without regard for her feelings. But he hadn't expected to be so drawn to her, or to feel such an immediate connection. The frontier was no place for romantic notions, he reminded himself firmly. They had a ranch to build, a life to carve out of this wilderness. Sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. Yet as he drifted finally toward sleep, Elias found himself hoping that perhaps, in time, Olivia might come to see him as more than just a practical arrangement. The next week passed in a blur of adjustments. Olivia proved herself capable and hardworking, quickly establishing her domain in the house, planting a kitchen garden, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Elias found himself looking forward to returning to the house each evening, to the smell of cooking and the sound of another human voice. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing meals and evening conversation, gradually learning each other's stories. Elias told her about his first winter in Colorado, when he'd nearly frozen to death in a blizzard. She shared tales of helping her father with difficult births and treating minors' injuries. Each revelation built a bridge between them, but still they maintained a careful distance, neither wanting to presume too much. On her 10th day at the ranch, Elias returned from checking the northern pasture to find Martha Whitfield's wagon in the yard. He entered the house to the unfamiliar sound of female laughter. "Elias," Martha called, rising from her chair at the kitchen table. "I was just telling your bride how you helped Thomas when his leg was caught in that old bear trap last winter. Carried him 3 miles through snow?" "She did," she explained to Olivia. "Mrs. Whitfield brought preserves and seeds for the garden," Olivia said, her eyes warm with amusement at his discomfort under Martha's praise. "That's mighty kind," he said, hanging his hat by the door. "Well, neighbors look after neighbors out here," Martha declared. "And I've been telling Olivia she must join us for Sunday dinner this week." "You too?" "Of course," she added as an afterthought. "We'd be honored," Olivia replied before Elias could think of an excuse. He typically avoided social gatherings, preferring his own company to the effort of conversation. After Martha left, Olivia raised an eyebrow at him. "You don't want to go?" "It's not that," he said, not entirely honestly. "Sundays when I usually ride the boundaries." "Surely the boundaries can wait one day." "I suppose." He studied her face. "You want to go?" "I'd like to meet more of our neighbors, yes." She returned to kneading bread dough. "Unless you're ashamed to introduce your mail-order bride." "Of course not," he said quickly. He struggled to articulate his reluctance without sounding unfriendly. "You prefer your own company," she finished for him. "I've noticed." There was no judgment in her tone, just observation, but Elias felt defensive nonetheless. "The frontier doesn't reward the sociable, in my experience." "Perhaps not, but it doesn't forbid friendship either." She shaped the dough into a loaf with practiced hands. "We'll go, and if it's terrible, we never have to accept another invitation." Something about the way she said "we" eased his resistance. "All right," he agreed. "But don't say I didn't warn you about Thomas Whitfield's terrible jokes." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Elias felt something shift inside him. A crack in the armor he'd built around himself since coming west. The Sunday dinner at the Whitfields proved less onerous than Elias had feared. Thomas and Martha had 3 children, ranging from 12 to 17, and their boisterous energy filled the small house with life. Olivia fit in seamlessly, helping Martha with the final dinner preparations while Elias and Thomas discussed cattle prices and the prospects for rain. "You got yourself a fine woman there, Keller," Thomas said as they stepped outside to smoke pipes after dinner. "Smart as a whip, too. Martha says she knows more about medicinal herbs than anybody she's met." "She assisted her father, who was a doctor," Elias said, feeling an unexpected surge of pride. "Lucky for us. Nearest real doctors in Denver." Thomas puffed his pipe thoughtfully. "You know, I had my doubts when I heard you'd sent for a bride. Thought you were too set in your solitary ways to make a go of it. But seeing you two together..." He smiled. "Well, seems I was wrong." Elias wasn't sure how to respond. He and Olivia had developed a comfortable partnership over the past weeks, but it was hardly the love match Thomas seemed to be implying. Yet something warm stirred in his chest at the thought that others might see them that way. On the ride home, as dusk painted the mountains purple against the sky, Olivia broke their companionable silence. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was nice to talk with another woman." "You're welcome." He hesitated. "Are you happy here, Olivia?" She considered this seriously. "I'm content," she said finally. "The work is hard, but satisfying. The land is beautiful. And you're a fair man." Not exactly a ringing endorsement, Elias thought, but honest. "Is there anything you need? Anything I could do to make things more comfortable?" She glanced at him, surprised by the question. "Actually, yes. I'd like to learn to shoot your pistol, not just the rifle. And I could use more shelf space in the kitchen." Both easily arranged. He smiled at her practical requests. "Anything else?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Tell me something you hope for, Elias. Something beyond just surviving." The question caught him off guard. Since coming west, he'd trained himself not to hope for much beyond making it through each season, building his herd, having enough to eat. Hope was dangerous in a land that could take everything in one bad winter. I suppose, he said slowly. I hope to see the apple trees bear fruit. To build the herd large enough that we could hire help. He paused. To add a proper porch across the front of the house, where we could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Good. It's important to have things to work toward, beyond just making it through another day. As they crested the final rise before their ranch came into view, Olivia suddenly placed her hand on his arm. Look, she whispered. In the meadow below, a doe and 2 fawns grazed peacefully near the creek, their forms silvered by the rising moon. Beautiful, Elias murmured. Yes, she agreed softly. This is a good place, Elias. I'm glad I came. Her hand remained on his arm the rest of the way home, a small point of warmth in the cooling evening air. That night, as they said their goodnights in the hallway between their bedrooms, Elias found himself lingering, wanting to say something more, but not sure what. Olivia solved his dilemma by rising on tiptoe and pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, husband, she said, then slipped into her room, leaving him standing in the hallway, his fingertips touching the spot where her lips had been. As spring warmed into summer, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Olivia's garden thrived, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The cattle fattened on the rich grassland. Elias added the shelf space in the kitchen as promised and began teaching Olivia to handle his Colt revolver during their spare moments. Squeeze, don't pull, he instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at an old tin can on the fence post. And breathe out as you fire. She followed his guidance, and the can jumped as her shot found its mark. Good, he said, genuinely impressed. You're a natural. Hardly, she laughed. But I'm a quick study. She handed the pistol back to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Thank you for teaching me. Every woman out here should know how to protect herself, he said seriously. I may not always be around when trouble comes. A shadow crossed her face. Do you expect trouble? Elias holstered the pistol. Not specifically, but the frontier has a way of testing people when they least expect it. His words proved prophetic sooner than either could have anticipated. The very next day, as Olivia was hanging laundry and Elias was repairing a section of corral, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared over the rise, moving at a deliberate pace toward the ranch house. Elias reached for his rifle, leaning against the corral post. Get inside, he told Olivia quietly. She gathered her laundry basket quickly, but paused at the porch. Who are they? Don't recognize them. Could be nothing, travelers looking for directions. But best to be cautious. She nodded and disappeared inside. Elias positioned himself casually near the corral, rifle in hand but not raised, as the riders approached. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and unshaven. The leader, a tall man with a scar running along his jaw, reined in his horse a respectful distance away. Afternoon, the man called. This the Keller spread? It is, Elias confirmed. Something I can help you with. Name's Wade Mercer. These are my brothers, Silas and Jeremiah. The man gestured to his companions. We're looking for work. Heard in town you might be hiring for the summer hang. Elias kept his expression neutral. He hadn't mentioned hiring to anyone in town. You heard wrong. I run this place alone. The man, Mercer, swept his gaze over the ranch, taking in the size of the operation. Seems like a lot for one man. My wife helps, Elias said, noting how the men exchanged glances at the mention of Olivia. And I manage. Wife, huh? Mercer smiled, revealing a gold tooth. Lucky man. Well, if you change your mind about hiring, we're camped down by Silver Creek for a few days. Looking for honest work. Something about the emphasis on honest raised Elias's suspicions further. I'll keep it in mind. Good day to you. The men tipped their hats and turned their horses, riding back the way they'd come. Elias watched until they disappeared over the ridge before returning to the house. Olivia was waiting just inside the door, his pistol in her hand. Who were they? She asked, setting the gun on the table. Said they were looking for work, but something fell off. He moved to the window, scanning the horizon. I don't like that they knew my name. Could they have genuinely heard about the ranch in town? Possibly, but Elias doubted it. He'd been careful to keep a low profile, avoiding the entanglements that often led to trouble in frontier territories. Either way, I want you to keep that pistol close for the next few days." That night, they bolted the doors and windows, a precaution they rarely took. Elias slept fitfully, waking at every sound. Around midnight, he thought he heard horses in the distance, but when he went to the window, he saw nothing but moonlight on the empty meadow. The next morning, they discovered 3 cattle missing from the nearest pasture. The tracks led toward Silver Creek. "I'm riding to the Whitfields," Elias said, saddling his horse. "Then following those tracks. Stay inside, keep the rifle handy." "Elias." Olivia's voice stopped him as he mounted. "Be careful." The concern in her eyes warmed him despite the situation. "I will. Lock the door behind me." Thomas Whitfield confirmed Elias's suspicions. "Mercer Brothers," he said grimly. "Bad news. Worked their way up from New Mexico, leaving trouble behind. Cattle theft, mainly, but rumors of worse. Sheriff in Pueblo's been after them for months." "Any idea why they'd target my place specifically?" Thomas shrugged. "Isolated. Relatively new operation. And word gets around when a man takes a wife. Some figure it makes him vulnerable, divided attention." Elias's jaw tightened at the thought of Olivia being factored into their calculation. "Will you ride with me to their camp?" "Safety in numbers." "Already saddling my horse," Thomas assured him. They found the Mercer brothers' camp deserted, with clear signs of a hasty departure. The remains of Elias's 3 cattle lay butchered nearby, the choice cuts taken, the rest left to rot. "They're sending a message," Thomas said grimly. "Testing how you'll respond." Elias felt cold anger settling in his gut. "They'll be back. Likely. Men like that, if you don't stand up to them first time, they just take more." Thomas checked his pistol. "We should alert the other ranchers, maybe form a patrol for the next few weeks." "Agreed." Elias turned his horse toward home, anxiety for Olivia spurring him to a faster pace than was wise on the rocky terrain. When the ranch came into view, relief washed through him at the sight of smoke rising from the chimney. But as they drew closer, he spotted a horse he didn't recognize tied at the hitching post. "Trouble?" Thomas asked, noticing his tension. "Not sure," Elias replied, spurring his horse to a gallop for the final approach. He burst through the door, pistol drawn, to find Olivia calmly bandaging the arm of a young boy he recognized as the Jensen's oldest son. "Elias," she exclaimed, "put that away. You'll frighten him further." "Sorry." He holstered his weapon, taking in the scene. "What happened?" "Carl fell from his horse and gashed his arm on a rock," Olivia explained, tying off the bandage. "Mrs. Jensen sent him here because she heard I had medical knowledge." The boy, about 14, looked pale but stoic. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured Elias. "Mrs. Keller says I won't even lose the arm." Olivia smiled at the attempt at humor. "You certainly won't, if you keep it clean as I showed you." She helped him to his feet. "Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection." After seeing the boy safely mounted and on his way home, Olivia turned to Elias and Thomas. "Did you find them?" "They were gone," Elias said. "But they took 3 of our cattle." Her face hardened. "What do we do now?" "We prepare," Thomas answered. "I'll spread the word to the other ranchers. We'll organize patrols, keep watch." After Thomas departed, promising to send one of his older boys to stay with them for added security, Elias took Olivia's hands in his. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never wanted to bring trouble to our door." "You didn't," she replied firmly. "Men like that bring their own trouble. But we'll face it together." The certainty in her voice strengthened his resolve. "Yes," he agreed. "Together." That night, despite Thomas's son keeping watch on the porch, Elias couldn't bring himself to retire to his bedroom. Instead, he sat in the main room, rifle across his lap, listening to every night sound. Around midnight, Olivia emerged from her bedroom, wrapped in a shawl over her nightgown. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I'm fine." She sat beside him on the small sofa. "You can't protect the ranch if you're exhausted. I can't protect it if I'm asleep when they come back either." "Then we'll take turns," she said practically. "I'll watch while you rest, then wake you in a few hours." He turned to argue but found her face so close to his, illuminated by the dying firelight, that the words died in his throat. Something changed in her expression as their eyes held, a softening, a question. Elias wasn't sure who moved first. Perhaps they both did, drawn by the same invisible force. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as her hand came up to rest against his cheek. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Olivia's eyes held his steadily. I didn't come all this way just for practical reasons, Elias. No, he managed, his heart hammering in his chest. No, I came because your letters showed me a man of honor, of principle, someone I could respect. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. What I didn't expect was to find someone I could love. The word hung between them, enormous and fragile. Elias had convinced himself for so long that love was a luxury frontiersmen couldn't afford, that opening his heart would only lead to pain when the harsh realities of the West inevitably took their toll. But looking at Olivia now, brave and beautiful in the firelight, he realized his careful fortress of solitude had already been breached. He'd been falling in love with her since she stepped off that train, perhaps even before, when her thoughtful letters had offered glimpses of her mind and heart. I've been a fool, he said softly. How so? I thought the frontier was no place for love. That to survive out here, a man had to be as hard and unyielding as the land itself. He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. But then you arrived, and everything I thought I knew began to unravel. She smiled, a mixture of tenderness and amusement. For someone so convinced he shouldn't feel, you express yourself beautifully. Only with you, he admitted. Only now. This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation. Only the certainty of two people who had found in each other something neither expected but both desperately needed. They spent the night talking in quiet voices beside the fire, planning how to face the Mercer threat, but also sharing dreams and fears they'd kept hidden. Sometime before dawn, Olivia fell asleep against his shoulder, and Elias held her, marveling at how completely his world had transformed in the short weeks since she'd arrived. For the first time since coming west, he allowed himself to hope for more than mere survival. He wanted to build something lasting with this remarkable woman, a home, a family, a life rich with connection rather than defined by isolation. But first, they had to deal with the Mercers. The next week passed in tense vigilance. Thomas Whitfield organized a rotation of neighboring ranchers to patrol the area. Elias moved the remaining cattle closer to the house and kept his rifle within reach at all times. Olivia practiced her shooting daily, her accuracy improving rapidly. On the 7th night after the cattle theft, the Mercers made their move. Elias was awakened by the urgent whisper of Thomas's son, keeping watch on the porch. Mr. Keller, riders coming. Elias was instantly alert, pulling on his boots and reaching for his rifle. Olivia was already awake, loading the pistol by lamplight. How many? Elias asked, joining the boy at the window. 3, I think. Coming from the East Ridge. Elias made a quick decision. Go for your father. Fast as you can. The boy nodded and slipped out the back door into the darkness. Elias turned to Olivia. Hide in the root cellar. There's a trap door under the rug in the pantry. I won't hide while you face them alone, she said firmly. Olivia, we face this together, she interrupted. You take the front, I'll cover the back door. There was no time to argue. The sound of horses approaching was growing louder. Stay out of sight, he conceded. Only shoot if you have no choice. She nodded, moving to position herself where she could see the back door while remaining hidden behind the heavy oak cabinet. Elias doused all but one lamp, then took up position near the front window where he could see without being easily spotted from outside. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house. In the moonlight, he could make out the Mercer brothers, each carrying rifles. Keller. Wade Mercer's voice carried clearly in the night air. We need to talk business. Elias remained silent, watching as the men conferred, then spread out to approach the house from different angles. We can do this easy or hard. Mercer called again. Your choice. Elias opened the front door a crack. You're trespassing on my land, he called back. And you stole my cattle. There's nothing to discuss. A shot rang out, splintering the wood near his head. Elias ducked back inside as more shots followed, peppering the front of the house. That's just to get your attention, Mercer shouted. Next ones go through your windows. From her position, Olivia whispered urgently. One's coming around back. Elias moved quickly to her side, seeing the shadow of a man approaching the rear door. Stay down, he murmured. The back door burst open with a crash of breaking wood. Elias fired a warning shot over the intruder's head. Next one won't miss. The man, Silas, the youngest brother, ducked back outside. More shots came through the front windows, sending glass shattering across the floor. "We're trapped," Olivia whispered. Elias's mind raced. Help from the Whitfields was at least an hour away. They couldn't hold off 3 armed men indefinitely. "The cellar," he decided. "We can defend the trapdoor if they get in. It's our best chance." They retreated to the pantry, Elias covering their movement with another shot toward the front door. He quickly rolled back the rug and lifted the trap door to the small root cellar below. "Go," he urged Olivia. "I'll be right behind you." She climbed down the ladder into the darkness. Elias fired one more shot toward the back door where a shadow was moving, then followed her down, pulling the trap door closed above them. The root cellar was small, dug into the earth beneath the house, with rough shelves holding preserved foods and seed potatoes. There was barely room for both of them to stand in the darkness. "There's a bar for the trapdoor," Olivia whispered, feeling along the ceiling. She found it and slid it into place, securing their position from below. Above them, they could hear the Mercers entering the house, calling to each other as they searched the rooms. "Where'd they go?" "Check the bedrooms." Furniture crashed as the men ransacked the house. Elias and Olivia stood silently in the darkness, weapons ready, listening to the chaos above. "I don't like hiding," Elias admitted in a whisper. "Feels like cowardice." "It's strategy," Olivia corrected quietly. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. We need to survive until help arrives." Her practicality steadied him. She was right. This wasn't about pride, but survival. The footsteps overhead moved into the kitchen, then the pantry. They held their breath as dust sifted down from someone walking directly above the trapdoor. "Nothing in here but food," one of the brothers called. "Keep looking," Wade's voice responded. They didn't just vanish. For what seemed like hours, they stood in tense silence as the men continued searching and eventually began looting the house. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood told them the destruction was extensive. "When I get my hands on these two." Wade's voice was closer now, in the kitchen. "Maybe they slipped out the back when we came in the front," another voice suggested. "Then we burn it," Wade decided. "Burn it all. They'll come back to ashes." Olivia's hand found Elias's in the darkness, squeezing tightly. The smell of lamp oil became noticeable, followed by the distinct crackle of flames catching. "We can't stay here," Elias whispered urgently. "If the house burns, we'll be trapped," she finished. "But if we go up now, we'll be shot." He felt along the earthen walls. These old cellars sometimes have side tunnels for ventilation or escape. Feel for any opening. They separated, each exploring a different wall of the small space. Olivia gasped softly. "Here, there's air coming through." Elias joined her, feeling where a narrow tunnel, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, extended from the cellar. "It might lead outside. It's our only chance." Above them, the fire was spreading. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards. "You first," Elias urged, helping Olivia into the cramped passage. "Keep going no matter what you hear. Get to the Whitfields if you can." She gripped his arm. "Not without you." "I'm right behind you," he promised. "Now go." The tunnel was a tight fit, forcing them to crawl on their bellies through the darkness. The earthen walls pressed in from all sides, the air growing thinner as they progressed. Olivia led the way, moving steadily despite the difficult conditions. Behind her, Elias could barely see in the absolute darkness, following the sound of her movement and the occasional whispered guidance. The tunnel seemed endless, winding beneath the earth in what Elias guessed was a southerly direction, away from the house and toward the creek. His lungs burned from the exertion and the smoke that had followed them into the passage. Finally, Olivia's voice came back to him. "I see light." The tunnel ended in a small opening half hidden by bushes near the creek bank, about 200 yards from the house. They emerged cautiously, staying low in the underbrush as they assessed the situation. The house was fully engulfed in flames, lighting up the night sky with an orange glow. The Mercer brothers stood watching the blaze, rifles still in hand, their horses tethered nearby. "They think we're dead," Olivia whispered. "Let's keep it that way," Elias replied. "We need to circle around to the stable. If it's not burning yet, we can get horses." They moved silently through the shadows, using the creek bed for cover. The stable, set apart from the main house, was still untouched by the flames. Inside, the horses nickered nervously at their approach, disturbed by the nearby fire. "Easy," Elias soothed, quickly saddling his stallion and a mare for Olivia. We need to move fast. As they prepared to mount, the stable door creaked open. Silas Mercer stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifle raised. Well, he drawled. Looks like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Elias pushed Olivia behind him. We don't want trouble, Mercer. Take what you want and leave. Too late for that. Silas stepped further into the stable. Wait. Jeremiah. Found our missing hosts, he called over his shoulder. In the moment his attention wavered, Olivia moved with unexpected swiftness. The pistol appeared in her hand, and she fired a single shot that caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Go, she cried, pushing Elias toward his horse. They mounted quickly, bursting from the stable as the other Mercer brothers came running, alerted by the gunshot. Bullets whizzed past as they galloped toward the creek, bending low over their horses' necks. They splashed across the shallow water and up the far bank, riding hard for the tree line that would provide cover. Behind them, two riders gave chase, Wade and Jeremiah, leaving their wounded brother behind. The forest, Elias shouted over the thundering hooves. We can lose them in the trees. They reached the pines just as dawn was breaking, the first gray light filtering through the branches. The dense undergrowth slowed their pursuers, allowing Elias and Olivia to gain some distance. They wound through the trees, following game trails that eventually led higher into the foothills. By mid-morning, they'd lost the Mercers, at least temporarily. They paused in a small clearing to rest the horses and take stock of their situation. The house, Olivia said quietly, looking back toward the valley where smoke still rose in the distance. Everything's gone. Elias pulled her into his arms. Not everything, he said fiercely. We're alive. We have the horses. The cattle in the far pasture should be safe. He pressed his forehead to hers. And we have each other. We can rebuild. She nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty. The Whitfields will have seen the smoke by now. Thomas will organize men. Elias checked his rifle. But we can't count on rescue. The Mercers will keep hunting us, wounded pride now, on top of their original greed. What do we do? Elias considered their options. There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles north of here. We can hole up there, try to circle back toward the Whitfields tomorrow. They rode cautiously, keeping to the cover of the trees. The trapper's cabin was as Elias remembered it. A simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, abandoned years ago but still sound enough to provide shelter. Inside, they found a few basic supplies left by previous occupants. Matches, some dusty blankets, a dented pot. It's not much, Elias apologized, clearing cobwebs from the single window. It's enough. Olivia unsaddled the horses and tethered them where they could graze nearby. At least for tonight. As dusk approached, Elias built a small fire in the fireplace, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance. Olivia found wild onions growing near the cabin and added them to the jerky Elias had in his saddlebags, a meager meal, but welcome after their ordeal. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the night catching up with them as exhaustion set in. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she set aside her plate. You saved our lives, Elias said quietly. With that shot in the stable. She looked down at her hands. I never thought I'd shoot a man. You did what you had to do. He took her hands in his. That's the frontier truth. Sometimes there are no easy choices. She met his eyes. I'm not sorry. I would do it again to protect you, to protect us. The simple declaration struck Elias to his core. All his life, he believed that survival on the frontier meant standing alone, relying on no one. But in this moment, he understood that true strength came from standing together. I love you, Olivia, he said, the words coming naturally now, all his earlier reservations swept away by the night's events. Not because you're practical or capable, though you are those things. I love you for your courage, your kindness, your unwavering heart. She moved into his arms, her lips finding his with a new urgency. Their kiss deepened, fueled by the relief of survival and the knowledge that everything had changed between them. When they finally separated, Olivia's eyes held a certainty that matched his own. I want to be your wife, she whispered. Not just a name, not just on paper. That night, on the rough blankets before the fire, they became truly husband and wife. Their coming together was tender at first, then passionate, a physical expression of the bond that had been growing since that first moment at the train station. Afterward, they lay entwined, the small cabin transformed by their love from a temporary shelter into something that felt remarkably like home. As dawn broke, they were awakened by the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Elias reached for his rifle, positioning himself at the window while Olivia took up the pistol, ready to defend their position. But it was Thomas Whitfield's voice that called out, "Keller, Olivia, you in there?" Relief washed through them as they recognized not only Thomas but several other neighboring ranchers, all armed and mounted. "Here," Elias called back, opening the cabin door. "We're here." The reunion was joyful, with handshakes and embraces all around. Thomas explained how they'd seen the fire, gathered men, and tracked the Mercers to where Silas lay wounded. "We caught the other two trying to rustle the rest of your cattle," one of the other ranchers explained. "They're tied up in Silver Creek, waiting for the territorial marshal." "The house is gone," Thomas said more gently, "but the barn and stable made it, and most of your herd is intact. We can rebuild," Elias said, his arm around Olivia. "We've already discussed it." The ride back to the ranch was somber but hopeful. The charred remains of the house stood in stark contrast to the beauty of the surrounding landscape. But the barn still stood, and the garden Olivia had planted was untouched by the flames. "We'll start today," Thomas declared, dismounting. "Everyone here will help. We'll have walls up before nightfall." And they did. Neighbors arrived throughout the day, bringing lumber, tools, food, and clothing. Women set up an outdoor kitchen. Men began clearing debris and setting foundation stones. Children carried water and ran errands. By sunset, the frame of a new house stood where the old one had burned, larger and sturdier than before. As darkness fell and the workers departed with promises to return the next day, Elias and Olivia stood together on the hill overlooking their land. The cattle grazed peacefully in the meadow, the creek sparkled in the moonlight, and the skeleton of their new home waited to be completed. "I never expected this," Elias admitted, holding Olivia close. "When I sent for a bride, I thought I was just being practical." She smiled up at him. "And when I answered your advertisement, I thought I was just seeking escape. Instead, we found something neither of us knew we were looking for. Home," she said simply. "Not just a place, but a feeling. Belonging." "Yes." He kissed her softly. "I was wrong about the frontier, Olivia. It's not that love has no place here. It's that without love, there is no reason to face its hardships." 6 months later, as the first snow of winter dusted the mountains, Elias and Olivia Keller stood on the porch of their completed home. The house was larger than the original, with a proper kitchen for Olivia and a small room that would someday, they hoped, belong to a child. The Mercer brothers had been tried and sentenced to prison in Denver, their reign of terror over. The ranch had recovered from the attack, the herd even growing with the addition of cattle purchased with the money Olivia had brought from Pennsylvania, savings she'd kept secret until they needed it most. "Look," Olivia said, pointing to the apple saplings Elias had replanted after the fire. Though dormant for winter, they stood straight and promising against the snow. "They survived. Like us," he said, drawing her close. She placed his hand on her slightly rounded belly, covered by her heavy winter coat. "More than survived. Thrived." His eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "You're certain? Doctor's daughter, remember?" "I'm certain." Her smile was radiant in the winter light. "By summer, there will be 3 of us." Elias felt a joy so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. The frontier had tested them, as Olivia had predicted that first night in the boarding house. It had taken their first home, threatened their lives, and forced them to rebuild from ashes. But in doing so, it had given them something far more precious, the knowledge that together, they could face whatever challenges the West might bring. As the snow began to fall more heavily, they returned inside to the warmth of their home. The fiddle that had somehow survived the fire stood in its corner, and Elias took it up, playing a gentle melody while Olivia prepared their evening meal. Outside, the Colorado winter settled over their land, harsh but beautiful. Within their walls, the warmth of love and the promise of family created a haven against the wilderness, not by conquering the frontier's wildness, but by finding in each other the strength to embrace it, with all its dangers and all its splendor. When Elias had ordered a mail-order bride, he'd expected a practical partnership. What had stepped off that train had indeed taken his breath away, not just with her beauty, but with her courage, her wisdom, and her unwavering heart. Together, they had discovered that the frontier wasn't where dreams went to die, but where they were tested, strengthened, and ultimately, gloriously fulfilled.